We have an awesome show in store for you with Todd Caldecott. He is an Ayurvedic practitioner and medical herbalist. He's been training and practicing many different countries throughout the world, including India. He has written 3 books, Food as Medicine, which we're going to be talking about tonight, the theory and practice of food, as well as Ayurveda, the divine science of life, and Ayurveda in Nepal. It's so good to have you here tonight, Todd. How you doing tonight?
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction.
Well, you're welcome. It's a really hot topic, especially now. It's kind of, what is it, Breast Cancer Awareness Month or something? And
something month.
Yeah, but there's definitely a lot of talk about that. Lots of people spending money on, cheap plastic objects and feathers and, painting their hair pink and doing things thinking that that's actually going to cure cancer. Of course, my line of thought is a little bit different, kind of resonates with your line of thought as well. Of course, we've both been through the other side and back. So if you would like, can you share with us a little bit about your path and what got you into this practice?
Sure. Well, let's see. I left home right after high school, and I didn't have any idea how to take care of myself or my health. I really didn't know how to cook very many things at all. And as a way to learn about personal health care, I grew interested in macrobiotics, and actually was a vegetarian for 10 years. I wasn't a strict macrobiotic practitioner by any stretch, but it was a tool that I was interested in learning and practicing to help me figure out things in my diet and my health that were questions for me. But it, for the most part, was pretty healthy until I went to India when I was 20, and my goal was to spend the least amount of money as possible, and so I went there on a budget of $2,000 for a year, and I traveled around on just a couple bucks a day, really, and ended up getting very sick, both amoebic and bacillary dysentery, and I was really cutting it pretty close there. I was very sick. But when I came back to Canada, I sought treatment from a number of different health practitioners and didn't get any relief until I met an Ayurvedic physician from south of India who was practicing here in Vancouver, Canada. And he provided me with a very simple protocol, mostly diet-based, but also a few herbal remedies thrown in. And within a short period of time, I actually, my condition was completely resolved. So I was really impressed and taken with this approach. And since there was nowhere for me to study Ayurveda here in Canada, I decided to study to become a medical herbalist. There actually was a college just opening up right around that time.
Awesome.
It's now the Boucher Institute of Naturopathic Medicine, but it started off as a herbal college. And so it was 3 years of full-time clinical study. And then after that, I went to India and did a clinical internship at a hospital in the south of India. And then I graduated from all that in 96, 97, and been practicing ever since.
Well, wonderful. Well, it sounds like the India in a year for $2,000 is definitely worth its own show. I'd love to know how you did that. But okay, so it's my understanding that you never really tried the mainstream medicine route?
Oh, certainly I did. I did try that. And, I have a lot of respect for mainstream medicine. I think it has its applicability, but I think that also it has its limitations as well. And while it can be very effective to treat acute disorders, and emergency medicine, I think, is a great boon to humanity, when it comes to treating chronic illness, Western medicine just isn't all that good at it. It's actually generally kind of a failure. So while I give kudos to my colleagues in the medical profession for having all the skill and training and being able to provide that life-saving medicine, which is so important, really I think we need to do a rethink of how medicine is practiced when it comes to treating chronic illness.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. Okay, so I guess apparently through your experiences of being ill and trying different remedies and such, you came to the conclusion that food can be used as medicine.
Well, I think that had already been my approach anyway. It's just that I didn't really know how to use it effectively. And what I had learned just from my exposure to macrobiotics was just a limited window, because macrobiotics has a particular kind of dogma that you need to follow. It's mostly lots of grains and cereals, and it's vegetarian or mostly vegetarian. And it has a philosophy that goes along with it. And while it is applicable in certain circumstances, it's also very limiting. And what I found is that as I went through my training and study and practice, that, diet is a little more complicated than just applying a particular dogma or theory to a person's life. There's no one-size-fits-all approach when it comes to diet. But if we can understand the spectrum of possibilities that diet has to offer, then we can use it in very unique ways to promote a good state of health.
Absolutely. There is a lot. I know people always come searching, they get tired of taking the drugs that aren't working and whatever it is. And there's so much information out there. And thankfully, I'm glad it's there, but there are so many rigid mindsets that, this is the only way, and it worked for me, so it's going to work for you, and so you have to do it this way or you're going to die, old and decrepit of cancer 3 years from now.
Yeah.
And a lot of fear in that. Oh, if you eat this, you're going to get sick, or if you cook that, or if you touch this. And I don't know, I tend to think that we can bring it on, whatever that dis-ease is, with our thoughts. For instance, if you're eating, pick something, and you read somewhere once that it's going to give you cancer. If you're thinking, I'm going to get cancer, or whatever it is, heart disease, every time you eat it, well, boom, there you go. Kind of become our thoughts.
Yeah, I think so. There's many different causes of things. I think that's the one thing that we need to look at when we're addressing disease and illness is that there's never one cause of something. And so there's always a multiple contributory causes to things. And so, our thoughts, our diet, our lifestyle habits, the medication that we take, the people we consort with, the climate that we live in, our ancestry, there's all these factors that we need to take into account. And so whenever someone has a theory that's based on one particular factor, as is the case in modern medicine, modern medicine has orientated us to think that there's a single cause to things, that it is a bacterial cause of Helicobacter pylori that causes ulcers. Mm-hmm. And yet Helicobacter pylori is a naturally occurring microorganism. In at least 20 to 30% of the human population has it and displays no symptoms. So clearly there's some other factor that enhances its pathogenicity, that makes it disease-causing, but it's not the organism necessarily. So we always need to look for multiple causes. And so when I'm working with patients, I don't just make one recommendation. I'm usually making, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 recommendations that address myriad number of factors in their diet, in their lifestyle, in medication, etc. So I think it's important to have a very broad spectrum approach.
Yeah, so basically you treat the individual as an individual, a more holistic approach, and look at all the underlying factors besides, just take this magic pill and it's your cure-all.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Now, if you would, can you give us a brief introduction to Ayurveda?
Sure. So Ayurveda is the classical system of healing from India. So it is like traditional Chinese medicine in the sense that it is a traditional system of medicine, but from India, not from China. Mm-hmm. And it is the oldest continuously practiced system of medicine on the planet. It has been around for a very, very long time. According to the internal history of Ayurveda, it states that it began when illness and disease began to affect humanity. And this was shortly after humans left off living their hunter-gatherer ways and began to live in settled communities. And when we began to live in settled communities, we didn't really know very much about hygiene. We didn't really know much about communicable diseases. We didn't know how to live together. And so Ayurveda was established as a system of medicine and healthcare, preventative healthcare, that would enable people to make this transition from the hunter-gatherer to the Neolithic and agrarian civilization that is the hallmark of Indian society. So, they've been an agrarian civilized society for, basically since as early as 4000 BCE. They had planned city-states on a grid with flushing toilets and garbage collection 5,000 years ago. Europe was still, basically people running around in furs and throwing spears. So, they have a jump on us. So and their level of sophistication when it comes to medicine is extremely high. When the British arrived in India, they found all these Indian physicians practicing types of surgery they had never seen before. Rhinoplasty, cataract surgery, abdominal surgery. These things were practiced in India as early as 3,000 years ago with a high degree of skill. And so Ayurveda is unique among all the different ancient systems of medicine because it had this advanced anatomical, surgical, clinical knowledge of the human body. The basic theory of Ayurveda, though, is different from Western medicine in the sense that it uses its own type of logic, its own type of methodology. It stands beside the ontological approach of Western medicine as being unique and different and equally valid, but its basis is different. And so if you come from a scientific background, it may be a little bit of a jump to understand some of the concepts and principles behind it. But in essence, I describe the difference as being one between a qualitative medicine versus a quantitative one. And the qualitative medicine is something whereby we're looking at relationships between qualities of things. How people can be either too hot or too cold or too dry or too wet. And these things are never absolute measurements. They're always relativistic. Like you can ask someone and they're like, yeah, I just feel so dry. Well, you don't really need to find out, what degree of dryness. There's no, dryometer that we can hook them up to and go, yes, you're 23.5% dry. So what we do is we understand the qualitative imbalance and then apply the remedies that address that. I can give you one example. I had a female patient that came to me. She was perimenopausal. She was in a new relationship, and she basically wanted to have sex, and she wasn't able to because it was painful. It was too painful because she was too dry. Now, she had been put on HRT therapy, hormone replacement therapy, and was taken off of it because of the concern or risk of cancer. And then she was given an estrogen suppository, which was placed inside of her uterus, and that wasn't working. And she was desperate. She had tried all the different medical options. And when she came to me, she expressed this quality of dryness. And all I did is I said, well, you're dry. Let's moisten you up. And so what I had her do was massage her nether regions with coconut oil twice a day and just her entire body once a day with coconut oil. And she did this dutifully, and she came back 2 weeks later, and she said, I can't believe how juicy and moist I feel. Her life had been transformed just with the application of coconut oil. That's it. And so, you could look at her condition and say, okay, she's perimenopausal, it's an estrogen deficiency, there's all these different clinical and biomedical parameters that we need to address, but the patient presents with dryness. So how do we treat this? So we could go through all these different types of treatments and all the different therapies, which may or may not work, or we can just moisten her up, which is exactly what we did, and we got the results within a very short period of time. Mm-hmm. Western medicine is always looking to measure something, but when you think about the things that are truly important to us as humans, things like love, happiness, these are not things that we can measure, but yet they are the things that drive us, the things that motivate us. And so we need to take account of them. And this is what Ayurveda does. It takes account of these qualitative distinctions between things. We're not always trying to measure things. Mm-hmm. Instead, we're trying to find the relationship or balance between these different facets.
Yeah, okay. And so Ayurveda as a practice isn't just about food or medicating things either, right?
Well, no, Ayurveda there are actually 8 branches or limbs to Ayurveda. And there's general internal medicine, there's surgery, there's specialized therapies of the ears, eyes, nose, and throat, there's pediatrics, there's treatment of infertility, there is anti-aging remedies, there is toxicology, and then the last branch is basically like a kind of psychiatric or spiritual therapy. Yeah. And these are all the major facets of Ayurveda. So you've got everything from surgery to general internal medicine and everything in between.
Okay. And don't they have like different personality types? Like I think it's Vata, Kapha, and Pitta or something?
These are called what are called the doshas. And dosha is a term which literally means blemish or that which is liable to disturbance. And so what it is, it's basically a measure of these qualitative imbalances. So someone who has Vata, we can characterize Vata by describing its qualities. Vata is dry, cold, and light. So some people are born with these qualities that when compared to other people tend to be more predominant. Like some people are just generally a little skinnier. Their circulation just runs a little bit slower. They tend to be a little colder, and their skin tends to be a little bit dry. Now, if that's just you from a constitutional perspective, i.e. that's just you in normalcy, then that's your constitution. But you could also acquire a Vata illness so that you never suffer from any of those issues in your life, except now suddenly you are. So we make a distinction between understanding the qualities that you're born with, that is your constitution, that can be classified according to Vata, Pitta, Kapha, or the qualities that you acquire over a lifetime that create imbalance. And that also is understood as Vata, Pitta, Kapha. But we separate them. One is your disease and one is your constitution. But you're right. The 3 doshas are the primary modus operandi of Ayurveda. But really all they are is they're just distinctions of different qualitative imbalances. So Vata is dry, light, and cold. Pitta is hot, light, and wet. And Kapha is cold, heavy, and wet. And so it's just an admixture of these different qualities. And you can be combinations of qualities. So you could be Vata, Pitta in nature. You could suffer from a Vata, Kapha disorder, etc. So it's really just an admixture of these different qualities that gives rise to the doshas.
Okay. I sure like the way you say it better than I do. Apparently you have a little bit or a lot more experience than I do. Of course, I've just brushed the surface on this science. I'm definitely curious, though. So how do we know which one of these we are?
Well, you're born with a particular admixture of these doshas.
Okay.
And the best time to determine that is during your childhood. Because what happens as we get older, we acquire all these different influences. We're kind of like layers of an onion. I think, as you get older, you can kind of appreciate that. There's all these layers that you accumulate. Layers of knowledge, layers of experience, but also layers of imbalance. Mm-hmm. And so when you get older, it's kind of hard to find out exactly what your constitution is because it's amassed by all these different layers. So while it's important to understand what your constitution is, it's more important to understand what your imbalance is. Mm-hmm. Okay? Mm-hmm. And once you understand your imbalance, you address and treat that imbalance. And once you've addressed it, you will get back at what your core constitution is. Right? Now, if you want to find out what that imbalance is, for example, in my book, Food is Medicine, I've got a questionnaire in there.
Okay.
And so people can fill that questionnaire. But the best way to do it, unfortunately, is probably to see a practitioner who can do it for you. But I've seen practitioners get it wrong, or sometimes they'll have a different perspective on the Constitution. The key thing is to keep it simple. People make it complicated. They find out what their Constitution is, and then they start limiting their diet and not eating this thing and only eating that thing. Yeah. And that's not what is meant by managing your Constitution. It's kind of like if you've got your mom and you've got a bunch of kids, and one of your sons is Pitta and your daughter's Kapha and then your other son is Vata, you're not going to make 3 different things for dinner, right?
Yeah.
You're going to make one meal, and then everyone's going to come to that meal and select those foods which, if they're in balance, are appropriate to them. Yeah. If they're out of balance, they'll be choosing foods which actually make them feel worse. Like you find a lot of people, when they get addicted to things like sugar or, milk or whatever it is, they crave them. Like, oh, but I need this. It's like, well, it's a craving that's imbalancing you further. It's not what your body really needs. Really, it's really important to understand about what foods are healthy, what foods support health generally, and then treat your imbalances. Find out where the areas that you need some help. Are you too dry? Are you too cold? Are you too hot? Are you too wet? Are you too heavy? Too light? Find out where you are, where you exist in that spectrum, and then treat it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks so much for that introduction to Ayurveda. I really appreciate that. I think that's another one that deserves its own topic tonight. But we did want to talk about food as medicine. And you just touched on something that reminds me of a few conversations and things this week. And that's cravings versus needs. How do we know the difference? For instance, I was talking with someone, I went to visit someone in the hospital this week, and one of their family members was talking about how they need to have soda, and they thought that, they were craving it for a reason, because it, must have been good for them in some way. And I remember the days before I knew about eating healthfully. And I would think, I need these French fries, or I need, the fizzes and the bubbles, or I need M&Ms, or whatever it is. So when it comes to health and listening to your body, how can you discern the difference between these cravings and our actual needs?
Well, it's very simple. I think when my kids ask me, like if they just eat dinner and then they're like, oh, Daddy, we're hungry. And I'm like, well, have more dinner. And they're like, well, we're not hungry for dinner. Well, guess what? They're not hungry. They are having a craving. They're hankering for something sweet. The thing is, you've got 2 organs, essentially, that your brain listens to when it comes to food. You've got your tongue and you've got your stomach. Now, your tongue craves all kinds of things. Your tongue loves to be stimulated. It's an organ of delight and stimulation, and it bears no responsibility for your digestion. In other words, you will find yourself listening to your tongue and eating all kinds of things, but by the time it gets to your stomach and sits in your stomach, you're like, oh boy, I shouldn't have eaten that. Why did I eat that? So the things we need to understand when we have a craving, is this an actual physiological craving for food and for nourishment, for energy? How does it feel if we ingest that food and it sits in our stomach? Does that feel like nourishment, or is it something that our tongue is desiring? Is it something that's just on a very surface level? It can be very powerful and deep craving, but is it something that's really going to satisfy and nourish us on that level? And so we just need to get clear on what foods nourish us versus those foods which stimulate us. We've changed our diet dramatically over the last 2 million years that we've been on this planet as the Homo genus.
I totally remember those days and like the whole, I need something sweet, then I need something salty, and they were just overbearing. And, apparently someone in the chat, at least one person in the chat, shares my need or maybe craving for chocolate malt. So I'm not the only one. So how do we know the difference?
Well, once again, when you eat a chocolate malt, it tastes delicious as you're eating it, but then how does it feel 20 minutes later when it's sitting in your stomach? So the thing is, if you have good appetite and you've eaten a meal, then you're going to feel light and energetic. You're going to feel content and satisfied. You're not going to feel this heaviness. You're not going to be, have a bunch of mucus in the back of your throat or nasal congestion or abdominal pain. You're going to feel good and energetic. So I think, we need to look at how we respond to these different foods, because some foods are conducive to health and some aren't. Now, the thing is that we changed our relationship with food. And things like our brain is hardwired to look for sugar in our environment. But the thing is that in the natural environment, sugar is very rare. I mean, if you go for a walk in the forest and you look for something sweet, you're not going to find it. There's not that many things. Even the berries that are out there and the roots that have some carbohydrate, they're not very sweet.
Dates, mangoes.
What's that?
Dates and mangoes.
Well, right, but mangoes, let's not forget that mangoes are a hybridized species. So the thing is that we've genetically modified them through breeding over thousands of years to create this very sweet, plump, delicious hybridized fruit. But the ancestral mango isn't anything like that. And nor is, for example, like a banana. People, bananas are actually a good example of a hybridized fruit. The ancestral banana is so full of seeds, it's like a pomegranate. You're pulling out little stones and sucking on them and throwing them away. It would take you a long time to eat a wild banana.
Wow.
But now we all eat these bananas that don't actually have seeds anymore and have dramatically higher sugar content. And, we've been playing with our food like this for a long time, but in the last couple hundred years, the big game changer has been things like refined sugar. And this, we have a biological evolutionary need to acquire nutrition and energy, and now we have the technology to make it super available to us. So the issue is that we have all these rapidly digesting, super energetic foods in our environment, and we've got this old world brain in a new world of food, and there's this big disconnect. Basically, what we're talking, sugar is like a kind of refined drug. People in the Andes can consume coca leaf tea, and it doesn't destroy their families. It doesn't get them into debt. They don't smash their donkey cart into the local telephone pole. But you give them refined cocaine, then guess what? So the same thing is that you can get sugar in wild plants, but as soon as you start refining a pure white crystalline powder, you created a drug-like substance. Which brings me to the issue of craving. That is an
incredible analogy there. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just had to say that. That was beautiful.
Well, and the thing that you need to remember, too, is that sugar, it actually initiates the same endogenous opioid secretion in the brain as heroin does. So it's just as addictive. Mm-hmm. It really, truly is. I had a colleague that worked at a halfway house for heroin addicts, and in the middle of the night, they would look to see who was in the dormitory and who wasn't. And who wasn't in the dormitory, they weren't in some, skanky, alley, shooting up with the heroin. They were in the local Dunkin' Donuts. They were in the local, donut shop eating a big bag of donuts because that was what was pumping up their opiate levels in their brain. It's a very cheap, inexpensive way to do that. And so this is how addicts will actually prolong their high by eating sugar. So it's exceptionally addictive substance. But, when it comes to craving, because, we should all have like a good, healthy appetite. I think we all remember what it was like when we were kids, and dinner's late or it's a family event and you're like lying on the floor dying of hunger and you're like, when's supper? That kind of hunger that, kids, and most of us nowadays, we don't really have experience anymore. But that kind of hunger is a valid hunger that needs to be respected. But there's this other kind of hunger, and it's a craving that you mentioned when we're thirsting after these really sweet, energy-rich foods. In part it is a physiological craving or addiction to this, but also there's a psychological component. Sweet taste in Ayurveda is associated with the dosha of kapha, and kapha is heavy in nature. And heavy things make us feel content. They make us feel loved and nourished. Like one way to understand the word kapha means to embrace or to love, to nourish and to support. And if sweet taste is associated with kapha, what we do is we acquire or desire sweet when we feel we need love in our life. So when we're emotionally upset, when we're having a hard time, we're not feeling supported, etc., we will crave something that makes us feel that way. And that's what the food does for us. The sweet food, the salty food, it provides us with a certain degree of emotional or psychological contentment. And so it's effective, except that it's very short-lasting. And ultimately, because it is a drug-like substance, it has serious repercussions for our health if we consume it on a regular basis.
My gosh, that totally makes sense. And, but I would be willing to step out on a limb and suggest that maybe sugar is even more addictive than heroin, because I think there's more people addicted to sugar than heroin at this time.
Well, it's a socially acceptable drug,
yeah,
right? I mean, you can't go over to someone's house without them offering you sugar, and so the thing is they're not offering you heroin, right? They're offering you sugar. So it's a socially acceptable drug. That's the only difference. I mean, look in our society, I mean, alcohol is acceptable, but, we were talking about this earlier, that alcohol, in terms of the risk, alcohol is one of the most dangerous toxic drugs that we have available to us. It just happens to be one of the legal ones, where there are other ones that are much less harmful, that are illegal. So, it's more of a function of societal conditioning than it has to do with really looking at the risk.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm thinking about the times where, I'm thinking of those super thick chocolate peanut butter and caramel malts. And it's one of those things I remember, oh my gosh, probably 10 years ago, someone suggested that, people smoke because they're suppressing a feeling. And, I smoked cigarettes at the time, and he would tell me just pay attention to what you're feeling, whatever emotion is going on when you reach for that cigarette. And he was totally right. Damn it. Made me mad, but it obviously forced me to grow and just be aware of something I wasn't previously aware of. And the sugar thing, I can totally see that. And and it goes the other way around, too. It's even an addiction within me to give it. I don't, I love to bake, and it was always associated with love, giving love.
Exactly.
Here, honey, have some cookies. Here, have some bread. And, oh, man, I'm making everyone sick. I'm sorry.
Well, sugar actually comes to us from India, and this is where it comes from. But in India, traditionally, if you wanted something sweet, you had to go out into the sugarcane fields, and then with a machete, you hack down the sugarcane, and then you pack it on your back and carry all this cane back to the village, where they then, take a big mortar and pestles and smash the juice out of it, which takes a lot of time and energy and especially human effort. And then they take that juice, that cane sugar juice, and then they put it into these big woks, and they slowly evaporate off all the liquid until they're left with this solidified cane sugar juice, what they call gur or jaggery. And that was sugar for ancient India. But, if they spent all this time producing it, all this sweat and labor and energy, they didn't invite the kids to come over and eat it right away. What they did is they put it on the shelf and they saved it for special occasions or to be used as a medicine. So when people come to your home, you might honor them because it's like gold. You would give them a little piece of your gold. You would give them some sweet. Or for a wedding, because it's a ceremony of love and celebration, we're all going to eat sweets, to celebrate this, right? But people didn't eat it every day. India is a really good example here because sugar came from India, and so India has a cultural affinity with sugar. It also has the world's oldest history of diabetes.
Okay.
It's got a 4,000-year history of diabetes, and also treatments for it, which are interesting as well.
Okay.
But the sugar in India is now ubiquitous. Anyone can get it. You don't have to work in a cane field, slaving in the hot, humid sun, cutting down sugar cane. You can just go to the local market and buy big bags of white sugar. And so there's a cultural belief that sugar is good, sugar is good, sugar is good, and now it's all available, and so people eat it all the time now. They'll eat it not just at weddings, and of course everyone has lots of relatives, so there's weddings probably every weekend for most people if they wanted to.
Yeah.
And there's lots of festivals, gods and goddesses. They'll have it with tea. They put lots of sugar in their tea. They have the highest rates of diabetes in the world now. It's because, and but they didn't used to. 100 years ago, they didn't used to. But they still had sugar. Sugar came from them, but they didn't have like an epidemic of diabetes like they had now. They did have it. But what's happened is this game changer, this refined white crystalline substance we call white sugar. And it's just a model for all the other ways in which the industrial food model has changed our relationship with food. It's all gone through this industrial model, and it's not the original substance that it was.
Okay, now, what about other sweeteners like local organic honey? Is that better for us? Please say yes.
Well, in Ayurveda, honey is spoken of as a highly important substance. It's not viewed as a sweetener per se. It's viewed as a very unique, special thing, that the secretion of bees. We go and we rob the bees of their honeycomb, and then when we did that, we also utilized the wax. Some traditional peoples, obviously most traditional peoples at some point ate the bee larvae as well, And there's also this thick layer of scuzz on top of the honey. That's all the propolis. People use that as well. So honey is a whole ball of wax, really. If you think about it, it's got many different facets to it. And all those things were viewed as being important, especially this specific excretion called honey. It was used as a medication. It can be used as a plaster to treat wounds. It can heal ulcers. It has antimicrobial properties.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has many different, it's a wound healer. It has many different uses.
Mm-hmm. It's even a good wound healer for your garden, for instance. If you break, say, a tomato vine or something, you can patch it up with a little honey and put a little Band-Aid on it, and voila, glue it back together.
So it's got all of these lovely uses. And, a sweetener is among those uses. But just because it's a good thing doesn't mean that, you hear, Ayurveda says honey is great. And then you can go to Costco, you can get 25-pound pails and put ice cream scoops of it full in your tea and honey is good for me. No, honey isn't good for you.
Okay, so moderation, as in everything.
Yeah, maybe a couple teaspoons a day. One nice thing you can do with honey for people who have mucus and congestion in the morning is to take some black pepper, maybe about 10 black peppercorns, and grind them up fine and add about a teaspoon of honey to that. Mix it up and then just lick that, and then follow that with some, drink that afterwards with some warm water. It has a great effect to stimulate your digestion and open up your sinuses and clear out all that mucus. So this is one of honey's special properties, is that when used like this, it has a mucus clearing effect.
Okay. All right. I've also heard about the honey with cayenne.
Mm-hmm. You could use ginger as well. Yeah, many things.
Okay. All right. Now, let me ask you this. Someone's asking in the chat. Let's say we're one of those people that eat 150 to 200 pounds of sugar each year. What would be a good way to curb the sugar?
Sugar addiction is a hard, difficult thing, but fortunately, it's not as addictive as heroin is. So heroin is a real challenge to go through withdrawal. Sugar is also pretty difficult. But most people, in my experience, can get past, with a properly constructed diet, can get past a sugar addiction within 6 or 7 days. Whereby they're not craving it anymore. Most people break down on the 3rd day, 4th day. It gets really bad around then as well. And there's actually many interesting reasons why that possibly is. You're withdrawing a neuroactive substance, but also suddenly you're depriving huge aspects of your body's ecology. Different fungi, for example, that thrive on these refined carbohydrates, suddenly they're not getting them anymore. And they secrete neuropeptides, which stimulate your nervous system, which makes you crave even more. Sometimes your cravings might be not even you. They might be part of another organism's desire.
Okay. All right. So what would you suggest for somebody to wean themselves off? Should they go cold turkey? Should they start introducing things like a little bit local organic honey, or maybe lots of berries, or just so they get that taste, or is cold turkey best?
I think what we're trying to do is fundamentally change the relationship of their sensory receptors on their tongue with their brain.
Okay.
Your tongue is hardwired right into your brain. And
yes.
if your tongue is hyperstimulated with sugar, that part of your brain is also hyperstimulated. It is in that state. So you can wean down, but you're trying to change your relationship with taste. And that's the thing I find with like a lot of Americans, and I'm speaking maybe outside as a Canadian, but people are what I would say are super tasters. They've only been brought up on tastes that are specific to the industrialized foods that they've grown up with, which are basically the sugar and the sweet. That's what people have come to recognize as nourishment. And so it's just a reflection of that. And I think we need to change people's relationship with taste. And you can do it gradually, but in my clinical experience, if people are coming to me with a health issue, then I'm like, let's do it. And they do it. It's done. And we're done in a week.
So by the time they come to you for help, they already know there's a problem, so that'd be easier.
Like many of your listeners probably, they have tried other options and haven't obtained results or are worried about the side effects of drugs. For solutions that really aren't a drug-based solution, most of these issues like diabetes is a disease of carbohydrate intolerance. It's pretty simple to understand. Just stop eating so many carbohydrates and perhaps even eliminate them completely, at least not for a time, if not for a time, maybe even forever, depending on what type of diabetes you have. And if you're type 1, then, you're lucky to be alive because without modern insulin, you wouldn't be alive,
Well, what's funny is they used to call it sugar diabetes, but now it's just diabetes. And obviously in the name, they kind of gave away why people were getting it. And I don't know. Here's some good news, though, Todd. One of the chatters said that we're freaking him out on sugar. So welcome, new beginnings, and I hope so. And I just want to say, in my personal experience, like I said, I was probably one of the worst eaters ever. And it really wasn't that hard to give it up. It's when you make that decision, you're ready. So just make sure that you're ready if that's what you want to do, and you will feel the difference in no time. I know I certainly did. So, that doesn't mean I'm perfect. I have a piece of cake once in a while. Of course, I make it myself. I don't go and buy stuff with preservatives and such, but, one is enough. Well, usually. Sometimes two.
Years ago, when my wife would buy like a chocolate bar, sometimes I would grab it and I would throw it across the street and say, "What is it you need?" And she just needed a kiss. She just needed a hug. I think that when you're trying to get over the sugar addiction, maybe groups of friends can do it together, and then you can hold each other's hand. Because probably you used to munch on sugar together. Now hold each other's hand as you go through the process, and you can grieve together the loss of that overstimulated taste, because it'll feel like that. But you'll get past it very quickly.
Yeah, no, you will. And you just touched on something I wanted to bring up. And, it's probably something on an energetic level. And to bring up again what the gentleman told me 10, 12 years ago about smoking, when you feel you have that craving for sugar, then just gently notice, what are you feeling at that time? What's going on an energy level? And, food is definitely a way to curb people's need to feel emotion, closeness, love, etc. So I think just by knowing that and paying attention to that is, I don't know if it's step one. I'm really not familiar with, the 12-step program. But, as far as for me, I think that's one way to just really notice where you're at on an emotional level as you reach for that. And I think the more you take note, the easier it is to just say no and actually go after what you really want, whether it's a kiss or a hug or a cry or whatever it is. So, yeah, it's not always just about the food. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Food is really just a reflection of our relationship to ourselves, because we are food. We're part of this great food cycle on Earth, this huge digesting machine, which is really what the Earth is. We're just a part of that.
Yeah.
We think we have a separate experience from the earth, but we're just a part of the earth. We return to the earth. So we have to kind of think about the connection of these things as well. And also look at something like sugar. It has, in other commodities like this, has a very serious impact on the environment. Sugarcane just destroys ecologies, as does palm oil, as does cotton. And there are many other alternatives that we could use instead that are much more sustainable. So for me also, food is a connection to the broader environment. And so anyway, I think there are many facets to it. And I think the emotional component is absolutely huge.
Now let me ask you this, something else that came up today actually on my page. They were talking about eating by blood type. What are your thoughts on that?
Okay, well, eating by blood type is a theory that has been around for a few decades anyway. There isn't really any science behind it, so it's hard to make a scientific assessment. And because it's not a traditional therapy, it hasn't been around, it doesn't have a long history of empirical practice, we kind of only can evaluate it on the basis of science. It's not like we could look at local First Nations or American Indian usage of different medicinal plants. I mean, they were working these plants for thousands of years. They knew how to use them. Many of the drugs that were developed in the late 1800s, early 1900s were plant derived, and many pharmaceuticals still are. And the fact of the matter is that it's only based on the most simplest and the oldest system of blood typing, which is the ABO blood typing system. But in fact, there are over 30 different blood typing systems now. And there actually are over 120 different antigens on the surface of a red blood cell. So it's not just A, B. So do we base a diet on the presence of just one or two antigens out of 120, on the surface of just one type of cell? To me, it's kind of like taking any discrete trait in your body and basing your diet on it. I've often said I could come up with the eyebrow diet or the fingernail diet, and because people have different eyebrows and fingernails, and I could arrange a diet on the basis of these differences, and I probably would get just as much success.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is that it's not just about one trait. It's not just about one aspect. It's not just about these little narrow parameters that science likes to play with, because science needs to ignore the whole because it's too complicated. So Ayurveda doesn't ignore the whole, it incorporates everything, but finds the relationship between all these different things, not just a few little discrete parameters like your red blood cell antigens.
Okay, I have another question for you, Todd, about the importance of our pH level and how food impacts it.
Okay, so that's an interesting question, because it's certainly a very popular theory that our pH of our blood plays a very important role in our health, and it certainly does, because our blood pH actually needs to be maintained within very narrow parameters, actually neither alkaline nor acidic, just kind of like right in the middle on the sweet spot. Mm-hmm. And various tissues of the body have different levels of acidity or alkalinity, like your skin and the vagina is slightly acidic. And so bacteria are cultured on the skin. They actually digest our secretions, and they make those parts of the body a little acidic. So some parts of our body are naturally acidic. Some parts of our body are more naturally alkaline, say like our duodenum that secretes a solution that neutralizes the stomach acid so it doesn't eat through our intestine. Mm-hmm. So there's all these different variances in pH. And what most people don't understand is that issue, that we're both acid and alkaline. So it really depends what part of the body you're talking about. But when it's the blood, it's neither acid nor alkaline. And the theory is that you eat food and it makes your blood acid or alkaline, and foods which make a little bit are acid are more dangerous versus those that are alkaline. And there actually is no real evidence behind that. But there are a lot of sort of parallel arguments that kind of support it. Like generally, people will say that acid foods are like hamburgers and French fries and all the bad stuff. And it is true, they do produce acid, but they're also just crap. They're also really bad for you for a lot of other reasons. So the thing is, a lot of things that are attributed to being acid or alkaline are true for other reasons, maybe. And the argument itself doesn't have a scientific basis, and most people don't even understand it on the very basic scientific level. Like, people think they can spit on a strip in their mouth or pee on a strip, and that tells them about their blood pH. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't give you any valid
how healthy they are.
It doesn't do anything.
Yeah, then you have, like, acidic foods, you know, say oranges or lemons or grapefruits, yet they're good for you. So it does get kind of confusing.
Yeah, it's full of contradictions because people don't understand the science. So they're just repeating a bunch of things that they've heard someone say, but they're not scientists. So the thing is, you know, people are not necessarily scientifically inclined, and that's fine. There are ways to understand health and disease that isn't necessarily based on science, but it's based on another kind of energetic knowledge that has a tradition and a practice. So people are inclined to want to understand things in an energetic way, and that's how people are applying the acid-alkaline theory. They're using it like yin and yang. So, but they're confused because it's a scientific theory. And if you don't understand the basic science behind it, then you're not really using it. You're using it to mean something else.
And according to what I've researched about it, that, you know, too alkaline is just as bad as too acidic. So, I don't know. We had one doctor.
Has to be neutral. Right?
Yeah, we had one doctor on the show when I asked him about citrus and how they're acidic. He says, well, your body converts them into alkaline. And I'm like, well, wait a minute. Then I guess that would be the same thing with, like, hamburgers? Right?
Your body takes all the food it eats and it converts it into a pH in the blood, which is maintained within very narrow parameters. So if you eat foods which have a high acid load, like lots of protein, you pee out all the acids. That's what your kidneys are designed to do. Now, if you drink alcohol and you don't exercise and you eat a lot of sugar, a lot of fructose, your kidneys won't excrete the acids and it'll build up in your body. You'll get gout and inflammatory joint disease. But that has to do with the other things that you're eating, not necessarily the meat. You take away the alcohol, you take away the fruit sugars and other sweet things, and suddenly the person can start peeing out the acids again. Their blood will normalize. So it doesn't have anything to do with the acid load of the food itself. It has to do with how is the body dealing with those things. Right?
Okay.
So if the kidneys are weak, you don't want to be eating a lot of high protein, high acid foods if the kidneys are weak. And certainly one great thing to do for your kidneys is to eat lots of vegetables. But eating lots of vegetables is good not just because they contribute potassium and are alkaline, but because they're filled with antioxidants. They're filled with fiber. They just fill you up too. They just make you feel full and satisfied and don't really pack on a whole bunch of calories. So there's so many benefits to eating vegetation, just like everyone's mother said, right?
Yeah.
Eat your vegetables.
Or grandma.
Grandma. Yeah, maybe some of our moms said eat the macaroni.
Okay, so once again, there's, you know, maybe some importance, but is it the end-all, be-all to physical health? Once again, probably not. Is that safe to say?
I would say, actually, I'd be a little more conservative and say it's mostly not a useful theory because it's confusing to people. Because what it's doing in some cases, what's telling some people, for example, don't eat animal protein. But some people need to eat animal protein. And that's not, just telling them not to eat animal protein doesn't make sense. So the thing is, I think it's just entirely invalid as a theory because it doesn't have a solid foundation. So I would say pretty much ignore it and start looking for something else because it's not useful. It's very limited.
Okay, awesome. Thanks for that, Todd. The next, we had a question about parasites and pets, and I know in your herbal formulas you make several different types of products. I noticed you had a parasite formula. So what would you recommend? And they did say, I don't know all the specifics, but they were like lots of open sores, and they mentioned ticks. So can you recommend any natural formulas for pets?
Well, you know, I have colleagues that are you know, veterinarians, and you know, just like if someone asked me and said, you know, Todd, I got all these sores all over my body, and I got these bugs on me, and what should I do? You know, I'd probably want to see them, and I'd probably want to look at them, and I'd probably want to make a clinical determination before I just recommended something. So likewise with the pet as well, it's hard to just say, like, what's going on. So, wow, is it a parasite or is it a bacterial? Is it, immunological or some allergic issue as well? There could be lots of things going on. So I hesitate to make general recommendations.
Okay, I'll tell you the little bit I know about them. They are in Egypt, and the woman cares for, stray dogs and such, and plus there's a whole bunch around there. They've used anti-tick shampoo, but apparently the ticks are still all over them. They also said, that, they have scars that the hair is not regrowing on. So I don't know. I know neem oil works great for us here. If you had some, and I did notice that neem oil was in your parasite formula. So
not the oil, but the neem bark and leaf.
The neem leaf.
Yeah.
Okay.
The thing is, if there are ticks, it's like, where are all these ticks coming from?
Yeah,
there's a carrier of ticks, and so if all the dogs have ticks, then that's a problem. So that's like a hygiene issue. So it's a challenge. Probably neem somewhere in the equation is going to be helpful, but also just dealing with the vector and just general hygiene generally, because where are the ticks coming from?
That I don't know. There. So, okay. I mean, I know, some places, certain times a year, like especially here in the Ozarks, they're just there. You walk in the grass, you walk in the forest, they fall on your head. So
you got to pick them out, and then you can apply something topically afterwards after you remove them. But you got to avoid them. I mean, that's something you want to avoid.
Yeah, that's about the best. I do feel that neem oil is definitely helpful here for my doggie. And DE is another one that's very helpful. I just put some DE in the water. Garlic is also good. You can put some garlic in the food, and hopefully you're not feeding them, Walmart dog food. I mean, what I have learned, especially, from gardening, is that parasites feed on sick entities, whether it's a plant or a human or a dog, and so there might be something else going on there. Okay, so all right, we don't have a straight answer for her, but hopefully they can get some neem oil and at least try that. I really don't know how many dogs they have. I just heard it was a bunch, and she was trying to help them all. So
well, I know of folks that work with, and there's even like Facebook groups. So if that person wants to email me, I'm happy to put them in touch with some experts, and because it is clearly like a situation that needs to be dealt with appropriately, and just randomly recommending things like garlic. I don't know, that might work, but I mean, where are the ticks coming from if there's so many?
Yeah. Is it the end-all, be-all? I guess it's hard to say from here right now.
TT is really good. I agree. I mean, that's one of the best deterrents. That's a good way to just regularly be grooming your dogs and brushing them. And you can be using neem powder as well as the DE and brushing it into their coats. So the hygiene thing is really important.
Okay, and someone here on the chat is saying you can make garlic juice, 3 ounces of garlic to 1 gallon of water, and just spray it everywhere to repel them.
Inside your home as well, yeah. There's lots of different medicinal plants that have been used for centuries to be prepared as aqueous solutions, or even what they used to call strewing herbs. These were herbs that you would grow in your garden during the Middle Ages, and you'd bring them inside, and you just throw them about on the floor, and you'd trample on them. And they released all these essential oils, lavender, rosemary, oregano especially.
Absolutely. Oregano, sage, citronella, eucalyptus. Get some more herbs, or at least start off with that and go from there.
Yeah.
Okay. Let me ask you, you brought up meat a couple times tonight. And that's another one of those things. There's, everybody needs meat. And then there's the faction that's, nobody needs meat. We're not designed to digest meat. So what are your thoughts on meat in general?
Well, that last statement that we're not designed to eat meat is just is untrue. So, I mean, humans have been eating meat. I mean, some recent archaeological evidence shows that it's been a major part of our diet for at least 1.5 million years. And we've also had the controlled use of fire for at least that time as well. And one of the unique things about humans is that we have these very large brains and tiny little guts. And unlike other primates, especially gorillas, that eat leaves all day, that have smaller brains proportionally and huge guts for digesting fermented fiber, we're very unique. We're different. And clearly we've been eating meat for a long time, and also not just eating meat, but cooking our food. So it really runs counter to the kind of the fad diet out there, which is the raw vegan diet. And it's not to say that I have problems with the raw vegan diet in every context. I don't. But the perspective that it offers isn't true. You know, that in terms of the evolutionary or biological perspective behind it, no, that's just patently untrue.
Okay, one scientist and doctor we had on the show, he brought up the point, which is true, I guess, that true carnivores, like big cats, for instance, have a very short intestine, whereas ours are, at least 6 feet long and winding around. And so that was his reasoning in explaining why humans are not designed to eat meat.
Right.
You know, it gets left behind.
We're omnivores, is what we are. And we are kind of like, we were probably evolved as scavengers. And so, like pigs and dogs to a certain extent, although they're definitely more carnivorous than us, we are adapted to eating a broad variety of different types of foods. And meat's been on the menu for at least 1.5 million years. So regardless of what he might imagine or extrapolate from digestive physiology, the fact of the matter is that we've been eating it for 1.5 million years. Mm-hmm. And we've got all of the physiological adaptations of a creature that eats a high-fat, high-protein diet that is prepared in such a way that we absorb it very well. So that's what we do when we cook our food. But our brain is 60% fat. Humans all over the world, in every single culture that they have looked, traditional peoples craved fat. That was the number one nutrient. And what's interesting is that in our culture, for at least 70, 80 years now, people have been told that the very thing which nourishes and supports the brain is bad for them. Fat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fat is a very important part of the human diet, and it has been for a long time.
In the time we have remaining, let's talk about Lyme disease. How would you help someone who was diagnosed with Lyme disease? And I know they want us to believe that there is no cure. I personally don't believe that myself. So what information can you share with us?
Well, there is no easy answer to the question of Lyme because we're still trying to figure out what it is. I mean, it is apparently a parasite that people acquire from ticks, a tick-borne disease. However, there does seem to be a number of what are called sequelae that are like signs and symptoms that arise after the initial infection, which seem to have other causes. So it seems to be that Lyme disease is a constellation of issues. First of all, some kind of damage that's caused by this parasite, but then in conjunction with environmental and dietary factors, even emotional and lifestyle factors, make that infection worse. So, and also lead to another number of other immunological endpoints which give rise to these different signs and symptoms. So it's a complex picture. And I know a lot of people treat it in a lot of different ways. You know, there's antibiotic therapies. Some people are using herbal products like teasel to treat the infection. In Nepal, the clinic that I work with in Nepal, they have a protocol that they believe can clear Lyme in as little as 3 months. And I have to say that you're talking about a tradition in Nepal that's been practicing for 800 years, and they have a lot of experience with very similar pathologies, and they do see a lot of patients internationally in their clinic. And so this is one remedy that I'm particularly impressed with. Otherwise, it's a very multifactorial issue where you have to address factors like your diet and digestion. That's fundamental. If people aren't addressing that particular issue,
That's always the first thing to do. Always, for every single disease you have, get your digestion in order. If that's not in order, you're never going to get better.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, so it's a multifaceted thing. Once again, there's no magic pill, but pay attention to what you are putting into your body. Okay. Well, and here's another thing that's come up recently is herpes. Another thing they tell us, there is no cure. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, once again, I've seen a number of patients with herpes genitalia and the lip herpes as well. And I've tried lots of different things and, heard many different things recommended. I think I've tried almost all of them and haven't really seen a lot of great results except for things like diet. Once again, diet seems to make a really big difference. If people avoid triggers that promote inflammation, seems to keep it down a bit more. If also you're taking care of your stress factors and lifestyle factors, which might be depleting you, so getting adequate rest and relaxation and not sweating the small stuff, that will also help.
Okay.
But
so stress plays a factor?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because it's nervous tissue. It's actually a virus living in nervous tissue. So when your nervous system is in a state of irritation and inflammation, it's going to activate things like herpes in your nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to, calm and settle that and practice things like regular exercise and meditation, perhaps yoga. That might be helpful. But
okay. And also, what about the emotional health, though? I mean, don't people usually end up with genital diseases, we'll call them, when they're emotionally stuck or have some kind of energy there that needs to be worked through, or maybe aren't taking care of themselves, maybe having too many partners, maybe unconsciously, things like that? Aren't there things we can do on an energy and emotional level?
Well, I think that people, if it's an infectious pathogen, if it's like herpes and it's you're acquiring it from other people, so it could be just once, that you had sex with someone and acquire it. It could be just one kiss and then you acquire it. So that's different than once you've got the issue, then how are you dealing with the issue after that? So now that you have the issue, how are you going to engage your own healing potential? So that healing potential is something that you can address on many different factors, including your emotions, including your lifestyle, including your diet, including exercise levels, relationships. So when there are stressors in any of those factors, then there are imbalances. Even climatic factors, even aging can play a factor, and these aren't things that we can necessarily have any control over. So we're always trying to maintain this delicate balance, and that's the whole point of Ayurveda. So we just don't look at it as herpes per se, but we look at the underlying imbalance. So all those other factors have to be addressed. But I will say that in terms of a particular remedy, some medications that I've used from Nepal, very interesting remedies, are the closest thing that I've seen to putting it into remission. It's herpes, which is interesting because it's supposed to be a virus that continually, it lives inside your spinal ganglion, replicates. But this seems to really put it into remission. So I'm quite impressed with the remedy itself.
Well, I want to thank you so very much for joining us here tonight, Todd. You've been such a pleasure.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and good luck with all of the projects you have going on. I hope to have you back in the future. Perhaps we can talk about them. Once again, foodasmedicine.ca, or go to his main website, toddcaldecott.com, and you can link to all the amazing articles, over 500 pages of free information. So check.
Do you experience anxiety?